Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Thomas Reed had always been a detail-oriented man. He worked as an accountant at one of the most respected firms in Charlotte, North Carolina, and had an impeccable reputation when it came to spotting inconsistencies. His mind worked like an emotional calculator. He processed gestures, pauses, glances, and shifts in tone with the same precision he used to analyze financial spreadsheets. So when Rebecca, his wife of 7 years, started acting differently, it didn't take him long to realize something was seriously off. They were small signs, each one easy to overlook on its own, but together they formed a clear, undeniable pattern. She began leaving the house earlier than necessary, claiming she needed to review documents before meetings. She came home late, always with excuses about demanding clients or tight deadlines. Her phone, which used to sit carelessly on the living room table, was now always in her purse, always on silent, always out of reach. When he asked about work, her answers were vague and generic, as if she were reciting a memorized script. And worst of all, she had stopped touching him. It wasn't just the absence of sex, it was the total lack of spontaneous physical contact. No hand-holding, no casual hugs in the kitchen, no goodnight kisses. It was as if she'd built an invisible wall between them, and Thomas knew exactly what that meant. There were other accumulating details too. Rebecca started wearing different perfumes, more expensive ones she'd never used before. She began dressing up more carefully, even on days with no important plans. Thomas noticed she changed her phone password every 2 weeks, something she'd never done in their entire 7-year relationship. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the bedroom dresser. Thomas glanced over and saw Kyle, work, on the screen, followed by a message that read, "Can't wait for tomorrow." When she came out of the bathroom, he casually asked who Kyle was. Rebecca hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering that he was just a new colleague at the office. That hesitation was enough for Thomas. He didn't say anything else, but he filed that information away mentally. In the weeks that followed, Thomas watched her even more closely. He noticed she smiled at her phone in a way she no longer smiled at him. That she chuckled softly while reading messages, as if sharing private jokes with someone else. That she now worked late every Tuesday and Thursday, supposedly the days she had meetings with this Kyle. Thomas didn't confront her. He didn't make scenes. He simply observed, noted everything mentally, and waited for the right moment. Because he knew people who cheat eventually make mistakes. And when they did, he'd be ready. That Friday morning, he made breakfast as he always did: toast, fresh coffee, orange juice, and scrambled eggs. Rebecca came downstairs dressed for work, hair styled, makeup flawless, but with a distant expression. She sat at the table, looked at her plate without interest, and after a few seconds of heavy silence, dropped the bomb. "Thomas, I can't take this anymore. I'm unhappy. I think we need to rethink this marriage." The words hit him like a brick, but Thomas didn't flinch. He simply paused with his coffee cup midair, looked straight at her, and processed every word of that statement. There was no genuine surprise in his eyes, only cold confirmation of what he'd already suspected. He took a sip of coffee, set the cup down slowly, and replied with unsettling calmness, "Are you unhappy, or are you hoping I'll be unhappy too?" Rebecca frowned, clearly not expecting that response. "What do you mean by that?" Thomas leaned forward slightly, interlaced his fingers on the table, and continued in a steady voice, eyes locked on hers. "You want me to make this easy for you. You want me to say I'm unhappy too, so we can split up amicably, no blame, no exposure, no one getting hurt. Isn't that it?" Rebecca was speechless. She opened her mouth to say something but gave up. She stood abruptly, grabbed her bag, and walked out without looking back, leaving her coffee untouched and silence louder than any argument could ever be. Thomas sat there for a few moments, but his mind was already racing at full speed. He wasn't the type to wait for things to happen, he made them happen. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd saved months earlier, back when he'd helped the firm investigate an internal fraud case. It was Greg Sullivan, a discreet and efficient private investigator known for wrapping up cases quickly. The call was answered on the second ring. "Greg, it's Thomas Reed. I need you today. Now." On the other end, Greg hesitated for a second, but something in Thomas's tone convinced him to agree. "Come to my office in an hour. Bring whatever you've got." Thomas hung up, grabbed his car keys, and left. At Greg's office, a modest room in a downtown Charlotte commercial building, Thomas got straight to the point. "My wife is hiding something. I need proof. Today." Greg, a middle-aged man with gray hair and experienced eyes, furrowed his brow. "Thomas, investigations take time. You can't expect miracles in a few hours." Thomas pulled out his wallet, opened it, and placed a substantial amount of cash on the desk. "I'll pay double your usual rate. I just need something concrete by the end of the day. I don't care how you get it, just make sure it's legal and verifiable." Greg looked at the money, then at Thomas, and nodded. "All right. But I'll need information, her full name, car license plate, places she frequents, anything that gives me a starting point." Thomas then revealed something that impressed Greg. Weeks earlier, driven by growing suspicion, he'd hired a technician to discreetly install a GPS tracker on Rebecca's car. It was a tiny, undetectable device that transmitted real-time location data. Thomas opened an app on his phone and showed it to Greg. "She said she was going to work, but the car's been parked for 40 minutes at a residential complex across town. This address here." He wrote down the address and handed it over. Greg reviewed the details, made a few additional notes, grabbed his professional camera and surveillance gear, and left immediately. Thomas went home, but couldn't sit still. He paced back and forth, checking his phone every 5 minutes, waiting for any update. Meanwhile, Greg arrived at the complex and began observing. It was a modern building with discreet security and upper-middle-class residents. He parked across the street, adjusted his zoom lens, and waited. About 20 minutes later, the main entrance opened and Rebecca stepped out, accompanied by a tall man in a well-tailored suit with confident posture. They chatted animatedly, laughed, and their body language was unmistakable, the way he touched her arm, how she leaned in close, how completely at ease they seemed together. Before parting, he pulled her into a long, intimate hug followed by a kiss that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Greg captured it all with his camera, taking photos from multiple angles to ensure both faces were clearly visible. After Rebecca got in her car and drove off, Greg decided to dig deeper. He approached the front desk, posing as a delivery person with a package, and confirmed the apartment number. Then, using public records online, he discovered the unit belonged to a businessman named Kyle Jennings, divorced, 42 years old, owner of a small corporate consulting firm. Greg also found that Kyle had a history of troubled relationships and had divorced less than a year ago. With a few more hours of work and contacts he had in tech companies, Greg accessed call logs between Rebecca and Kyle from the past 3 months. There were hundreds of calls, many during work hours, others late at night. He also obtained screenshots of their conversations on a messaging app Rebecca thought was secure, but which had known vulnerabilities. The messages were devastating. Rebecca and Kyle openly discussed their meetings, exchanged intimate texts, and, worse, meticulously planned how she'd leave the marriage. In a conversation from 2 weeks prior, Kyle wrote, "You need to start laying the groundwork. Tell him you're unhappy, that you need space. Make him think it's his idea to separate." Rebecca replied, "I know, but I'm scared of how he'll react. Thomas is too sharp." Kyle shot back, "That's exactly why you need to move fast. The longer you wait, the more chance he has of finding out." In another message, Kyle offered, "As soon as you leave, I've already got an apartment ready for us. You won't need anything. I'll take care of everything." Rebecca gushed in response, you're amazing. I can't wait for us to live this openly. Greg printed everything, organized it into a folder, and by around 3 in the afternoon returned to the office where he'd arranged to meet Thomas again. When Thomas arrived, Greg placed the folder on the table and said, "You were right. And it's worse than you imagined." Thomas opened the folder and began reading. Every line, every photo, every message was a painful confirmation, but also validation that his instincts had been correct. He wasn't crazy, wasn't paranoid. Rebecca had truly betrayed him, and worse, had planned to manipulate him psychologically into believing the separation was mutual. When he finished reading everything, Thomas closed the folder, took a deep breath, and smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of cold, calculated satisfaction. He thanked Greg, paid him, and headed straight to the office of Charlotte's most aggressive divorce attorney, a man named Harold Mitchum, known for showing no mercy in divorce cases. Harold had a feared reputation in the city. He didn't negotiate, he destroyed. In Harold's office, Thomas presented all the evidence. The attorney, a 60-year-old man with decades of experience and eyes as sharp as blades, examined everything carefully. He flipped through the photos, read the messages, reviewed the location logs, and when he was done, nodded approvingly. "This is gold, Thomas. North Carolina recognizes adultery as a relevant factor in asset division. With this evidence, you won't just walk away clean, you'll ensure she gets the bare minimum. I can have the paperwork ready in 2 hours." Thomas didn't hesitate. "Do it now. I want everything ready before she gets home." Harold worked with impressive efficiency. By 5 o'clock, the divorce petition documents were drafted, signed by Thomas, stamped, and ready for official filing. Thomas returned home and began setting the stage. He didn't just want to confront Rebecca, he wanted her to understand, visually and emotionally, the magnitude of what she'd done. He wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal in a way she'd never forget. He went upstairs to his office, turned on the printer, and started printing everything. All the photos of Rebecca with Kyle, every screenshot of their messages, all the location records showing her visits to his apartment. When he was done, he came downstairs with a huge stack of papers and began arranging them on the living room wall like a corporate presentation or a criminal investigation board. He used tape, colored pins, even red strings connecting specific dates, locations, and events. He created a visual timeline showing when the affair began, when it intensified, and when she'd planned her manipulative exit strategy. Right in the center, prominently highlighted, he placed the signed divorce papers marked with fluorescent yellow highlighter. It was a cold, methodical, relentless, and devastating display. When he finished, he sat on the couch, crossed his arms, and waited, staring at the mural like a general surveying the battlefield before the decisive war. Rebecca arrived home around 7 that evening. She looked tired but carried the expression of someone who believed everything was under control, someone who thought she was perfectly manipulating the situation. She opened the door, stepped inside, took 2 steps, and froze completely. Her eyes slowly scanned the mural on the wall, photos of her and Kyle leaving the building, kissing, embracing, intimate messages printed in large letters, detailed plans of manipulation laid bare for anyone to see, and finally, the divorce papers right at the center of it all. All the color drained from her face. She turned paper white. Her bag slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a dull thud that echoed through the silent room. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Thomas remained seated, motionless, watching every one of her reactions with the calmness of someone who already knew exactly how this would end. "Thomas. This isn't," Rebecca stammered, grasping for words that simply didn't exist. Thomas stood slowly, walked toward her with measured steps, and carefully pulled the divorce papers from the wall. He handed them to her with a terrifying calmness. "Isn't what, Rebecca? Isn't what it looks like? Because it looks exactly like what it is. You planned to deceive me, manipulate me, make me look like a fool while you built a parallel life with another man. And this morning, you had the nerve to tell me you're unhappy, as if I were the problem. Rebecca tried to move closer, reached out as if to touch his arm, but Thomas stepped back, avoiding any contact. Don't touch me. You lost that right the moment you chose another man over me. The moment you decided lying was easier than being honest. She started crying, tears streaming down her face as she desperately tried to mount some defense. Thomas, please, we can talk. I was confused, I didn't know what I was doing, Thomas cut her off with a dry, bitter, almost cruel laugh. Confused? You were so confused you planned every detail, every lie, every secret meeting. Confused is when you can't decide between pizza or a burger for dinner. You knew exactly what you were doing. And you know what's worse? You thought I was dumb enough not to notice. That I'd swallow this "I'm unhappy" story and agree to an amicable split while you ran into your lover's arms. He pointed to the mural. Everything here is evidence. Every photo, every message, every time you left here saying you were going to work and went straight to his apartment. I have it all documented, stamped, verified by a professional investigator, and ready to present in any court necessary. Rebecca collapsed to her knees on the living room floor, sobbing uncontrollably, hands covering her face. Thomas, I can change. I can end things with him right now. We can go to therapy, we can start over. You can't just throw away 7 years like this, you can't destroy everything we built. Thomas crouched in front of her, looked directly into her red, swollen eyes, and replied with a coldness that cut deeper than any shout ever could. You're the one who threw away 7 years. You're the one who destroyed everything we built. I'm just picking up what's left. And you know what's left? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You turned our marriage into a lie, a farce, cheap theater. He stood up, picked up the papers that had fallen to the floor, and placed them back in her hands. You're going to sign these now. Or I'll send all of this, he pointed to the mural, to your job, your parents, everyone you know. Everyone will find out exactly what kind of woman you really are. Choose. Humiliated, cornered, with no way out, trembling from head to toe, Rebecca picked up the pen from the coffee table and signed the papers. Each signature seemed to tear a piece from her soul. When she finished, Thomas took the documents back, checked the signatures, folded them carefully, and placed them in a folder. He pointed to the door. Now you're leaving. You have until Sunday at 6 p.m. to pick up the rest of your things. I'll have everything packed in the guest room. After that, I'm changing the locks and you'll never set foot here again. If you try to come in, I'll call the police and file a restraining order. Rebecca tried to argue once more, but Thomas opened the door and stood there, unmoving, waiting for her to leave. She picked up her bag with shaking hands, took one last look at the mural exposing the raw, brutal truth, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, a final sound that echoed like the end of a chapter. As soon as he was alone, Thomas took a deep breath. There was no relief, no happiness, just a strange emptiness mixed with a sense of duty fulfilled. He carefully took down the mural, tore every photo and printout into small pieces, and threw it all away. Not because he wanted to forget, but because he no longer needed it. The truth had already served its purpose. He picked up the phone, called a locksmith, and scheduled all the locks to be changed first thing the next morning. Then he called a security company and arranged for cameras to be installed around the house. Nothing would be left to chance. Nothing would be vulnerable again. In the days that followed, Thomas blocked Rebecca's number everywhere possible, blocked her on social media, and instructed his lawyer Harold to handle any attempt at contact. She called dozens of times, sent desperate messages, even showed up outside the house one Saturday night, but the newly installed cameras recorded it all. Harold sent her a formal notice warning that any attempt at trespassing or harassment would be treated as a property violation and result in immediate legal action. Rebecca was completely isolated, cut off, voiceless, with no control over the situation she herself had created. But the most devastating part of the story was yet to come. A few weeks after the confrontation, Thomas received an unexpected call from Greg. The investigator had kept monitoring the situation out of professional curiosity and because, in a way, he felt invested in how it would end. He'd discovered something surprising and thought Thomas deserved to know. "Thomas, you won't believe this. That Kyle Jennings guy? He's completely disappeared from her life." Thomas held the phone, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Greg explained, "As soon as he found out the affair had been exposed, that you had all the documented proof and a lawyer involved, he panicked. He blocked her number, cancelled the lease on the apartment where they met, and just vanished. He even changed his phone number. He doesn't want trouble, doesn't want to be named in lawsuits, and certainly doesn't want to take responsibility for a woman who just destroyed her own marriage." Thomas was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. There was a poetic justice in it that he couldn't have planned better if he'd tried. Greg continued, "She's gone to his apartment several times, I saw it through the tracker you kept active. But he's not there anymore. She's called dozens of times, sent messages, but he's blocked everything. Rebecca's completely alone now, no husband, no lover, no home. And from what I've heard through some contacts, she's having trouble at work too. It seems the story leaked, and her reputation is ruined." Thomas thanked Greg for the update. Though he took no pleasure in her pain, he recognized the fairness of the situation. Rebecca had bet everything on a man who never truly intended to be with her. She'd thrown away a solid marriage, a man who respected and cared for her, for an illusion, a fantasy that crumbled at the first sign of real trouble. In the months that followed, Thomas focused on rebuilding his life. He completely renovated the house, replaced the living room furniture, repainted the walls in new colors, changed the bedroom decor. Each change was a step toward erasing her traces from that space. He bought a new car, joined a gym, picked up hobbies he'd abandoned. He started going out with friends again, accepted invitations he used to decline, and slowly began to feel like he was reclaiming pieces of himself he'd lost over the years. At work, his performance improved significantly. Without the emotional distraction and weight of suspicion, he could focus entirely on his projects. He received a promotion and began leading a larger team. One day, about 4 months after the divorce, Thomas was at a cafe in downtown Charlotte reviewing reports on his laptop when he saw Rebecca sitting alone at a table in the opposite corner. She looked completely different, thinner, hair dull and unkempt, deep dark circles under tired eyes, wearing simple, styleless clothes. She held her coffee cup with both hands, staring into nothing with a vacant, defeated expression. She saw him too, and for a brief second, their eyes met. Rebecca tried to offer a weak, half-hearted smile, maybe hoping for some sign he still cared, some opening for conversation, some trace of compassion. But Thomas simply looked away with absolute indifference, closed his laptop, picked up his coffee, and left the cafe. There was no anger, no desire for further revenge, no malicious satisfaction. Just pure indifference. To him, she had become a stranger, someone he once knew but who no longer had any place in his life. It was like looking at a random person on the street whom you don't recognize and feel absolutely nothing for. That night, Thomas dined alone at an Italian restaurant he and Rebecca used to frequent in the early years of their marriage. He ordered his favorite dish, drank a glass of red wine, and for the first time in months felt a deep, genuine peace. It wasn't the peace of forgetting, it was the peace of having fully moved on. He'd learned valuable lessons through that painful experience. He learned that trust is a rare and precious gift, and when it's broken so deliberately and calculatedly, no amount of tears, apologies, or promises can rebuild it. He learned that respecting himself matters more than holding on to a false relationship. He learned that some people enter our lives not to stay, but to teach us what not to accept. Rebecca had made conscious choices, and those choices now carried devastating consequences she faced alone. Kyle had made cowardly choices, and he too faced consequences, fleeing like a coward at the first sign of real trouble, proving he never intended to commit seriously. And Thomas? Thomas had made the hardest choice of all, the choice to respect himself, to accept nothing less than he deserved, to refuse to become complicit in his own betrayal, and to move forward without looking back, without regrets, without losing his dignity in the process. Thomas Reed and Rebecca's story didn't end with deafening screams, physical violence, or dramatic tragedy. It ended with silence, dignity, and the deep understanding that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying the other person, exposing them publicly, or inflicting proportional pain. The greatest revenge is simply moving on, building a better, more authentic, more dignified life, and letting the natural consequences of others' choices do the work. Rebecca learned, in the hardest and loneliest way possible, that manipulation comes at a high price, that betrayal leaves deep scars, and that throwing away something real for an illusion is a mistake paid for a long time. Kyle learned that cowardice and lack of character always come back to haunt you, that using people has consequences. And Thomas? Thomas learned that, in the end, the only person who truly needs to believe in you, validate you, and respect you is yourself. And with that unshakable certainty etched into his chest, he rebuilt his life, brick by brick, choice by choice, until that painful past became just a distant memory of a time when he hadn't yet fully known his worth, what he deserved, and how capable he was of rising again on his own. 6 months later, Thomas was at a company event when he met a woman named Sarah, an engineer from another division. They exchanged brief conversation, shared smiles, and for the first time since the divorce, Thomas felt a small spark of genuine interest. It didn't mean he was ready for a new relationship, but it meant he was open again, that he'd healed enough to consider the possibility of trusting again in the future. And that, in itself, was a victory over pain, over betrayal, over a past that tried to destroy him but in the end only made him stronger, wiser, and infinitely more aware of his own value. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.